Welcome to a Hoop Scoop special report. I'm Jarret Johnson. I'm joined by the mighty Joe. Yeah, your well mighty Joe. Texas Tech is a 6th seed in the South region of the NCAA tournament. They will be taking on one of the hottest teams in the whole country in NC State, who just won 5 games in the ACC tournament, including an 8-point victory over the Tar Heels, their in-state rivals, a number 1 seed, by the way, in the tournament, to win the ACC tournament championship. But what do you think about, just first off, before we go into the rest of the bracket, Texas draw and all that, what do you think about that matchup with NC State? What's the first thing that stands out to you?
Well, the first thing is, the tendency is when a team wins the tournament, their conference tournament,
yeah,
they're hot, right?
Yeah.
And I think people tend to maybe that concerns them a little bit. Like, okay,
sure,
this team is red hot coming out. They just won their conference tournament, won 5 in a row, beat the what is the number 1 seed, the North Carolina Tar Heels. But, that's always not a good barometer. I mean, the conference tournaments in power conferences are such sort of strange things because everybody has such different motivations and different levels of motivation. I mean, North Carolina State, if they didn't win it, they weren't in.
Right.
They were highly, highly motivated, more than anybody, and, North Carolina, pretty much no matter what happens, they were at worst a 2 seed and quite possibly a 1. So, I wouldn't necessarily read that much into it, just as you don't read too much in the fact that back in 2019, Tech lost in the first round of the Big 12 tournament
to West Virginia.
Yeah. And then look what happened.
Yep.
So you can kind of throw that out the window, except for the fact that it was what got North Carolina State into the tournament.
Yep.
As for North Carolina State itself, they're, I think, more of an offensive than a defensive team. They scored at a pretty high rate, very guard-oriented team, but not with great big physical guards, the sort that has given Tech trouble in the past. More along the same size as Texas Tech's guards for the most part, really. And I mean, if you count Darian Williams as a guard, then Tech may even be a sort of a bigger, more physical guard unit than North Carolina State, although they do have a guy by the name of Casey Morsell, who is really hard-nosed, tough defensive guard, and you're going to see him matched up on Pop quite a bit and maybe some on Toussaint, and he can present some problems. Leading scorer is a guy named DJ Horn, another guard who's averaging close to 17 points a game. The guards is where they live. They got a dude, 6'9", 275 space eater by the name of DJ Burns.
Yeah.
But strangely enough, with all that bulk, he's not a dominant rebounder by any stretch of the imagination. He's more one of those agile, dancing bear type big guys.
Yeah.
So you actually have to guard him around a lot of different spots. He doesn't plant himself down in the lane and just do damage down there. So kind of an unusual player. Offensively, I tell you, they don't turn the ball over. And they force some turnovers. They got a good margin on turnovers. So you're going to need to take care of the basketball against North Carolina State. And Texas Tech has done a pretty good job of that most of the time this year, but they've had a few games where they're making a lot of inexplicable passes where you're like, and turnovers, and you're like, what are you guys doing? Losing focus, apparently at times, getting loose with the ball. So you need to clean that up and make sure that doesn't happen against North Carolina State. But I don't think this is a bad matchup for Tech.
Well, 2 things stood out in terms of what McCaslin and the Texas Tech players said in the press conference following Selection Sunday when Texas Tech learned its matchup and seeding and all that. One was Burns in defending the big man, and then, of course, the health of the Red Raiders. McCaslin was, once again, and I don't blame him, non-committal in terms of talking about Warren Washington and his status. He said he has been practicing, and that they would want him to go full speed in practice before him actually playing, but they've been trying to work him back in. He has been practicing, and he said they won't know up until game day if he's able to go or not. And then Darian Williams, who of course turned his ankle in the quarterfinal, Big 12 quarterfinal matchup against BYU, and was held out. We were told as a precaution against Houston. He was in a boot at during the show here at the USA on Sunday, and McCaslin was non-committal about him too. He said he's doing better, but he's not sure yet. So I don't know if that's just gamesmanship, coachmanship, and all that. But I would expect Darren Williams to play after a turned ankle, and him being able to play later in that game. But I'm no doctor, And maybe McCaslin, like I said, maybe McCaslin's just not showing his hand yet. Now, Warren Washington, I don't know. We'll have to see. But it sure does seem like Texas Tech, if they're going to do anything in this tournament, they need both those guys.
Yeah, you got to have it. I mean, and this is a totally different situation than the game against Houston, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's one and done.
Yeah.
You know, it's do or die. So, I mean, I believe that if Texas Tech had to beat Houston in that game in order to have a shot at the NCAA tournament, if Tech had been on the bubble, I believe Darian Williams would have played.
Yeah, I do too.
I think he would have been out there. So I expect him to play against North Carolina State. Warren Washington is who knows? I'm not real confident about that he's going to play. But I mean, if both of those guys are down, then there's a pretty low ceiling on what you can accomplish. If you could somehow manage to beat North Carolina State without those two guys, which I think would be very difficult, you could take that and run with it. But you're probably not going to get any farther than that. It's you need those guys.
So Texas Tech as the 6th seed is the matchup against the 11th seed NC State. That's Thursday. We don't have a tip-off time at this point. That will be coming soon, but it is Thursday in Pittsburgh. If they were to win, they would play the winner of the 3 seed Kentucky versus the 4th seed Oakland.
Right.
Now, I don't know anything about Oakland. I've seen Kentucky a couple of times. What do you think about that matchup? And I mean, is the thought that it would probably be Kentucky who they would play? I mean, more so than normal, just a 3 seed versus 14 seed. But what do you think about that matchup and who Tech would potentially play in the second round?
Right. Well, I mean, Kentucky is Kentucky, which means they have all world talent. Yeah. Always. They have one of the great coaches in the land, in John Calipari. They're an offense-dominated team. They can really score. Naturally, they're going to be a challenge for anybody that they go up against. So, but not an invincible team. And if Tech is healthy, I could see Texas Tech giving Kentucky a run for the money on that one. I think it would be a very good game. Oakland, believe it or not, I've actually seen Oakland play. Yeah. And there's an interesting player on that team. His name is Jack Golke. Okay. He's a hard-nosed dude, but this is a guy who shoots the three-pointer like nobody's business. Okay. I mean, he is a deadly deep shooter. He really is. And here's the interesting thing. He has shot, I believe, over 100 shots this season, and only 3 throughout the entire season were inside the arc.
That is an amazing stat.
It's
incredible.
Really is. It really is. And so, but he's a serious shooter. You got to get on him. They've got another guard who was their conference MVP. He's a very good player. As bigger upsets happen than Oakland over Kentucky, it could happen. Either way, NCAA tournament, any game you play is going to be a challenge. You better be right. And but I McCaslin has been a pretty good postseason coach, and I expect he's going to have Texas Tech ready to play.
And then Texas Tech, if they were able to get past NC State and then either Kentucky or Oakland, they would go to Dallas for the South Regional. Houston is the number 1 seed in the South region, and we obviously know that's a tough matchup for Texas Tech, the way their guards defend. But I mean, if you're getting to that point, then it's going to be a tough team no matter who you play, who's won some games already in the tournament. But I think it's a great opportunity. Don't get me wrong, I get Houston would have a lot of fans at Dallas for that regional, but Texas Tech, we've seen it. We've been there in terms of Texas Tech playing in the NCAA tournament in Dallas, and they shut the city down, and that's quite an accomplishment. That's where I'm from. It's hard to do unless you're Cowboys or Mavericks or Rangers, to be quite honest. So for them to have an opportunity, if they get to the Sweet 16, to play in front of what would be overwhelmingly a Red Raider crowd for at least 1, maybe 2 games, would be a huge advantage for Texas Tech. So I think while overall it was from my just quick glance, it's a tough draw for Texas Tech in terms of what they've done this year, and then the region they're in and all that. That could be a potential huge upside for the Red Raiders if they're able to get to the second weekend.
Yeah, that could the home crowd would definitely make a huge difference, and it would be kind of like Iowa State in Kansas City. You saw the difference I mean, there was no comparison, Houston fans versus Iowa State, So it would be something along those lines, maybe. Marquette is the number 2 seed in the regional. Tech would, if they advance to the Sweet 16, probably get Marquette at that point. And Tech is something like 4-25 or 4-26 against Big East teams, teams that are currently in the Big East or were in the Big East. So that would be a monkey that you would have to get off your back. But with the Tech fans there, anything could happen. And, you know, Houston, I don't think that's good for Texas Tech at all. But, I mean, there's no guarantee that
they'll still be playing.
I mean, these crazy upsets, they happen, you know. And Houston's health is not particularly good either right now. So who's to say that they might not get knocked out before any meeting with Texas Tech? So, you know, we'll just have to see. But it would certainly be interesting to go back to Dallas.
One final question, Mighty Joe. In terms of just you talking about Houston or talking about Tech's health and all that, do you think playing in the Big 12 and having such a competitive league where night in and night out, it's a dogfight, whatever cliche you want to use, do you think it's an advantage overall or a disadvantage when you compare of like being toughened up for an NCAA tournament versus also though you're injured? I mean, look at Texas Tech. It's a mass unit. Houston. We can name several other Big 12 schools. That's not to say Kansas. That's not to say That's another great example. It's not to say that other teams and other conferences aren't beat up or don't have significant injuries. It just seems like the rough and tumble Big 12 has really. This year we've seen a lot of the teams and near the top of the conference suffer some major injuries, and I just keep wondering. I get asked a lot: is it worth to be battle hardened to have these injuries? Like, what do you think? What's more of an advantage? Yeah,
it's a good question. It's just sort of the question of, does it toughen you up or does it soften you up?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Well, maybe a little bit.
Tenderize you a little bit.
Exactly. Put them on the grill. You know, I think overall it's an advantage, provided that you don't actually lose somebody. Yeah. You know, I mean, if it's a deal where guys are banged up but they can still go at close to 100%. Then I think it's definitely an advantage because, I mean, you know, it's like swinging 3 bats in the on deck circle. You know, that's what it's like every night against the Big 12 guys. I mean, it's carrying an extra heavy load. So in theory, when you step in against some of these other teams compared to what you've been seeing in the Big 12. Maybe it feels like relatively light lifting, you know. So I think there can be an advantage in that regard. But I mean, if it's so bad that you're actually some of your key players or any of them are out, then it becomes a disability. But I mean, you know, the Big 12 has fared pretty well in the NCAA tournament over the last several years. So overall, I think it's probably a plus.
All right, matchup set. Texas Tech takes on NC State Thursday in Pittsburgh. Mighty Joe, great stuff from you as always. Thank y'all for watching, and until next time.